The Iron Warriors are one of the loyalist Space Marine legions of the first founding, renowned for their mastery of siege warfare, both in defense and in attack. They are severe and relentless masters of the science of war among the Space Marines, embodiments of strength and discipline devoted exclusively to the systematic destruction of the enemy. The Legion was commanded by its Primarch, Perturabo, as an extension of his own mind and body, with the will of every legionary completely subordinated to victory. More than in any other legion, the life of each warrior was secondary to his duty, a resource as valuable in the ruthless calculus of war as a bolt round or a laser cannon charge. The Fourth Legion forged a reputation for cruelty, for strategic brilliance, and for an unmatched ability to bring down any supposedly impregnable fortress that dared to defy the will of the Emperor. Armed with the distrust born of bitter experience, the Iron Warriors have often been labeled as paranoid. Yet in the wake of the events of the Dornian Heresy, not even their brother Astartes can be fully trusted. As masters of siege warfare, they were instrumental to the success of the Great Crusade, and in the aftermath of the Heresy, they refortified the Imperium to withstand both internal and external assaults. While other legions placed their faith in dangerous psychic powers or the superstition of blind belief, the Iron Warriors instead rely on thick walls, overwhelming firepower, and meticulous planning to secure victory. Founded, like the other legions, on Terra during the final stages of the Unification Wars in the mid-30th millennium, a considerable amount of surface detail regarding the origins of the Fourth Legion has been preserved. It is known that its founding took place amid the ruins of a renegade fortress on the Auro Plateau of Sek Amrak. The warlike weapon tribes, the Blood Scourges, and the surrounding tech enclaves provided the Legion with much of its earliest waves of recruits, as the recalcitrant region was fully brought into the Terran unification, swiftly becoming one of its most steadfast loyal domains. Documentary evidence attests that the Fourth Legion's gene seed demonstrated above-average adaptability and that implant rejection rates were notably low, particularly when compared to the large-scale implantation difficulties encountered with other progenoid strains, problems that would not be fully resolved until the acquisition of the gene laboratories of Luna. This advantage meant that the Legion's fighting strength developed rapidly, expanding to field several battalions fully ready for combat, while some of the other legions were still unable to deploy more than a single active sentry. As a result, the Fourth Legion entered active service early alongside the First and Fifth Legions, the Dark Angels and the White Scars. The Legion first fought on Terra itself, crushing the last remnants of resistance, and subsequently took part in the conquest of the Sol system. It appears that the early successes of the Fourth Legion were rewarded with priority resupply of new classes of weapons and engines of war, as the Emperor's alliance with Mars made such assets available. In addition, the Legion received a significant influx of Terran recruits originally earmarked for the Third Legion, further increasing its numbers to offset the continual losses accumulated in battle. Owing to this genetic adaptability and its proven record in combat, the Fourth quickly became one of the most numerous of the Astartes legions during the early years of the Great Crusade, allowing its forces to be divided among multiple expeditionary fleets. As the armies of the Great Crusade pushed beyond the borders of the Segmentum Solar, several sources indicate that the Fourth Legion rapidly lost any remaining ties to Terra, both cultural and in terms of recruitment. Nevertheless, as the expansion continued, its military doctrine remained virtually unchanged. The Fourth Legion's adherence to the organizational structures, methods of warfare, and panoply established as the template for the Astartes legions at the outset of the Great Crusade remained constant, with no interaction with a Primarch imprinting a new cultural stamp upon it for many years. As a consequence, its methods of war likewise remained largely unaltered regardless of circumstances or enemy, and the Legion habitually overcame any obstacle through relentless, methodical force rather than through cunning stratagems or displays of bloody heroism. These combined factors increasingly set them apart from many of the other legions. Unlike those that, within a few decades, had evolved to display clearly recognizable and, in some cases, extreme character traits, alongside distinctive modes of warfare that diverged significantly from the basic pattern, the consistency and pragmatism of the 4th Legion's operations stood out in sharp contrast. Such traits led other Space Marine legions and their lords to dismiss them as unimaginative, mechanistic, and even lacking in honor. Despite such criticism, the High Command of the Great Crusade regarded these qualities as strengths, resulting in the 4th being viewed as one of the most reliable legions to deploy, and among the most willing to carry out external orders without question. For this reason, the 4th Legion was increasingly employed to fight campaigns, often thankless but vital, of grinding attrition and prolonged bloodshed, swiftly becoming a true workhorse legion, trusted as much for its martial power as for its unwavering reliability in the strict execution of orders. No, not very different from the original canon.
Olympia was a world divided into mountainous city-states, where open conflict was restrained by robust fortifications and solid defenses, refined and perfected over centuries. By the time the Emperor arrived on Olympia, Perturabo had risen to command the armies of Locos, one of the most powerful city-states. His innate abilities allowed him not only to successfully plan the invasion of several neighboring city-states, breaking centuries of stagnation, but also to thwart the preemptive strikes of those who feared they would be next. Perturabo was a genius in the arts of siegecraft, yet when it came to human interaction, he was cold and distant. Throughout his youth, he was plagued by loneliness, as well as by the mystery surrounding his own origins. However, this detachment was not evident when he was reunited with his true father, the Emperor. Instantly recognizing the bond between them, and at last able to comprehend the reason for his own existence, Perturabo received him with a warmth he had never believed possible. As they spoke, he came to see his father's great crusade as more than a simple exercise in tearing down the defenses of worlds that opposed the Imperium. He perceived it instead as a means of bringing rationalism and enlightenment to a galaxy mired in superstition. As a first step, the Emperor granted him command of the 4th Legion of the Adeptus Astartes and charged him with the task of unifying Olympia under his authority. The former rulers of the city-states were outraged at being reduced to the status of vassals, but given the circumstances, they had no choice but to submit. Perturabo rebuilt the Iron Warriors in accordance with his own ideals. However, in his interactions with the Legion's Tech Marines, it became clear that he still had much to learn. While his Legion made its preparations, Perturabo undertook a journey to the techno-adepts of Mars that, to a less accomplished rationalist, might have been considered a pilgrimage. He astonished the Magi with his extraordinary capacity for analytical reasoning and absorbed the accumulated wisdom of the Red Planet at a staggering pace. Mars became, in effect, a second home to Perturabo. But in time, the moment came to apply all he had learned upon the ultimate stage of war, the Great Crusade.
Tell them that ruin has come to their world, death, despair, and red war. Tell them that their hopes and their pride have been reduced to nothing. Tell them that their hollow whispers fall upon deaf ears, that their gods are dead, that human reason has slain them. Tell them that the angels of death have arrived. Tell them that nothing can save them now. Perturabo, Primarch of the Iron Warriors, had trained his legion well, and the Iron Warriors' mastery of combat engineering and siege warfare made them extraordinarily effective at bringing worlds into compliance with the Imperium. With seemingly effortless precision, they could determine the most efficient route through enemy defenses and dismantle even the strongest bastions. While the Iron Warriors became essential to the momentum of the Great Crusade, their reserved demeanor often meant that credit for their achievements was given to others. Perturabo himself had little need for glory, but he recognized the damaging effect its absence had on the morale and effectiveness of his sons, who did not share his indifference. This frustration may have contributed to the rivalry between the Iron Warriors and the Imperial Fists escalating from disagreements over siege methodology into outright animosity. The campaign on the world of Shravan was so fiercely contested that 4 Primarchs were present at its conclusion. At the victory banquet, Horus Lupercal lavishly praised the Iron Warriors for their accomplishments, including the destruction of the final enemy citadel, and proclaimed Perturabo the foremost master of siege warfare in the Imperium. Rogel Dorn, however, disagreed, stating that the Imperial Palace on Terra, designed by him and defended by his Imperial Fists, was impregnable. Perturabo, with cold logic, countered that after studying the plans, he had identified several vulnerabilities that a determined attacker could exploit, and further estimated that, if required, his Iron Warriors could breach the walls within 2 months. The hall erupted in uproar. The Imperial Fists accused Perturabo of treason and of plotting the Emperor's assassination. Amid the accusations and insults, Perturabo's genuine intention to offer recommendations on improving the Emperor's security was drowned out, and only the intervention of Horus and Fulgrim prevented the matter from descending into bloodshed. Unsurprisingly, Shravan was the last world on which these 2 legions fought as allies. After many decades of success, the momentum of the Great Crusade began to falter. Expansion had pushed outward from Terra at such a pace that supply lines became overstretched and vulnerable. Horus, one of the few Primarchs Perturabo considered a true friend, sought his counsel regarding the threat to the Crusade's advance. Perturabo concluded that several strategically vital worlds were falling prey to invaders, or even attempting to secede from the Imperium, and that the forces assigned to protect them were inadequate. When Horus asked how best to resolve these issues, Perturabo recommended that such worlds be garrisoned by Astartes. Knowing his legion was by far the best suited for the task, he offered the Iron Warriors for the role.
Though the logic was undeniable, the decision proved disastrous for Legion morale. They became warriors without war, isolated and scattered across the galaxy in detachments as small as a single squad. As supply lines were secured, expeditions pushed ever farther from Terra, requiring the establishment of yet more garrisons. The number of Iron Warriors remaining at the front dwindled to the point where they could no longer operate effectively on their own, and became increasingly dependent on other forces to execute their battle plans. This trend became evident at Ullanor, where Horus was named War Master, an honor owed in part to the unprecedented number of worlds brought into compliance by the sons of Horus, a figure that would not have been so high without the sacrifice and support of the Iron Warriors. With fragile composure, Perturabo raised the issue with the War Master. With irrefutable logic, he explained that the garrisoned worlds had stabilized to such a degree that his legion's talents were being wasted, and he noted the increasing resistance faced by the Crusade's advancing forces. In his view, his legion was best suited to reinforce the offensive. Horus relented, and recognizing that Perturabo's hunger for battle could be turned to the Crusade's advantage, reassigned nearly half of the garrisons to the administration of the Imperial Fists. Freed from the suffocating constraints of garrison duty, the Iron Warriors returned to the front with renewed fervor. They set out to prove their worth so decisively that the War Master would have no choice but to release the remainder of their legion. From the purging of the Hrud Warrens of Gugan, which had resisted Imperial forces for decades, to the overthrow of the living crystal fortresses of the Kugi, nothing seemed capable of halting their relentless advance. Even the alarming news that the Ultramarines were on the verge of seceding from the Imperium was seen as an opportunity to demonstrate their value.
Though he despised placing his legion under the command of Rogel Dorn, who was to lead the assault, Perturabo nevertheless committed the Iron Warriors to the task of bringing Guilliman to heel at Istvan. The astropathic reply he received was as brief as it was cryptic. A legion that cannot even defend its own home world has no place confronting other Astartes. Urgent communications from Olympia soon revealed that riots had erupted across the planet, and enraged mobs roamed the streets, attacking imperial structures and demanding the restoration of independence. It appeared that the former rulers had progressed from resentment to open rebellion in their attempt to reclaim power. Amid the chaos, no one thought to ask how Dorn had learned of the unrest so quickly. By the time they realized the truth, the heresy had already begun.
With rebellion erupting on his homeworld, Perturabo ordered the Iron Warriors to return to Olympia with all haste. During the voyage, they received word from War Master Horus concerning Dorn's treachery on Istvan and of demonic forces preparing to plunge the Imperium into civil war. Though Perturabo initially dismissed the existence of such nightmarish entities, it soon became clear that his distrust and hatred of Dorn were well-founded. Only much later, after the massacres of the Heresy and the devastation of the Iron Cage worlds, was the full scope of Dorn's designs revealed. Istvan had been engineered as a trap to annihilate those legions Dorn had failed to turn to the path of the ruinous powers. To prevent the Iron Warriors from falling into the same ambush, Dorn's agents had fomented an uprising on Olympia to divert them from the coming war. However, they had underestimated the strength of the recently reinforced Olympian garrison, which swiftly restored order and began purging chaos demagogues and their wayward followers. Confident in the security of his homeworld, Perturabo redirected his fleet toward what he believed would be Dorn's final destination, Terra. Though he had once despised garrison duty, the journey made its effectiveness painfully clear, as well as the vital role such forces played in keeping loyal supply lines open. Far less welcome were the garrisons that had recently been handed over to the Imperial Fists, now performing much the same function for the traitors' cause. There was no time to destroy them, but Perturabo swore to his legion that they would reclaim them as soon as Dorn's rebellion was crushed. Above all, they had to reach Terra and save the Emperor, for to lose him would be to lose everything. The voyage became a torment as they listened to the pleas of their allies on Mars. They were under attack not only by chaos-corrupted Astartes and the traitor Titan legions that had joined them, but also by the Iron Hands, who were rumored to be preparing to unleash a terrible weapon from the depths of the Noctis Labyrinthus. Perturabo longed to come to Mars's aid, but with the sons of Horus poised to descend upon Terra, there was no alternative. The Mechanicum's desperate appeals soon turned into bitter threats and an ultimatum. If the Iron Warriors did not come at once, they would be considered dead to the Mechanicum for all eternity. Venomous accusations were hurled freely, branding the Iron Warriors oathbreakers and worse. Finally, the fleet, weary of the abuse, blocked all frequencies, and the global transmissions from the Red Planet fell into absolute silence.
War engulfed Terra, but the Iron Warriors were inexorably drawn toward the Imperial Palace, Dorn's self-proclaimed masterpiece. Now they would have a satisfaction of tearing it down stone by stone. The War Master had assigned them containment actions to hold back the traitors within, slowing their advance toward the Emperor's throne room. The longer the enemy's attention was diverted from the true location, the more time the Master of Mankind would have to enact his designs. Perturabo, however, was not content to bombard the palace from afar. He intended to breach its walls and prove to Dorn, once and for all, the superiority of his legion's siegecraft. The Iron Warriors tested the palace's defenses with ferocity, uncovering valuable insights into weaknesses in its design, but paying a terrible price in brotherly lives.
Seeing the mounting losses, Horus ordered a withdrawal, arguing that those warriors would be needed in the wars to come. Even Conrad Kurz, half a galaxy away, contacted Perturabo and begged him to retreat. Yet the Iron Warriors would not abandon the liberation of their garrison worlds, nor the protection of their Mechanicum allies, merely to avoid confronting their most hated foe and lose the chance to end Dorn's heresy once and for all. On the 55th day of the siege, the Iron Warriors succeeded in breaching Dorn's supposedly impregnable palace, thus proving their superiority over the Imperial fists in the art of siege warfare. Their assault was repelled, however, not by Rogel Dorn, but by Sanguinius and his Blood Angels. When the battle ended, hundreds of Astartes lay dead amid the ruins, yet none of these losses wounded the Legion as deeply as the sight of Perturabo's broken body. Devastated by the loss of their Primarch, the Iron Warriors regrouped for a renewed assault on the Eternal Gate. Ignoring even Horus's orders and determined to join Perturabo in death, they were brought back from the brink only by the personal intervention of the Emperor himself. With great reluctance, they withdrew to fortify the new heart of Imperial resistance, the Astronomicon. Those bastions proved vital when the traitors finally breached the walls of the throne room and discovered they had been deceived. The Iron Warriors proved as resolute in defense as they had been in attack. Their efforts were crucial not only in containing the traitor legions, but also in inflicting devastating losses upon them. Their technical expertise was equally invaluable in the reconfiguration of the Astronomicon, first to weaken the demonic legions on Terra, and later, at the end of the Heresy, to sustain the grievously wounded Emperor, in both body and spirit.
Though Dorn was dead and his accomplices had withdrawn from Terra, the Legions of Chaos were far from broken. Brutal internal conflict still ravaged the Imperium, and fleeing traitor Astartes did everything in their power to fan the flames of war wherever they went. On some worlds they lingered for a time, creating centers of corruption and laying waste to the surrounding systems. Worst of all were the worlds firmly garrisoned by the Imperial fists. Their presence and their influence upon the traitor cause had been a heavy burden. Thus, even before the last pockets of resistance on Terra had been fully extinguished, the 4th Legion departed to fulfill Perturabo's promise to reclaim those worlds. The pursuit gained new urgency due to the provocative transmissions emanating from those planets. They spoke of populations enslaved and sacrificed to the dark gods, of worlds reshaped into fortresses of chaos. The Legion Noster's decision to have each Grand Company assault a different world simultaneously so as to prevent the completion of their fortifications was initially received as a bold stroke worthy of Perturabo himself. In truth, it was the act of a man driven by grief, unable to match the skill and judgment of his fallen Primarch. Each Grand Company had ties to a different world, and disputes over which should be liberated first threatened to tear the Legion apart. Yet when they arrived, they discovered the traitors had deceived them. The fortifications were already complete. Mourning for their Primarch had erased all trace of their usual cold, analytical objectivity, and thus, across a dozen worlds, the already diminished Grand Companies fell into the traps laid for them.
In what would become known as the Iron Cage campaign, the Iron Warriors were drawn into bloody stalemates. They lacked the strength to break the chaos-reinforced fortifications, and their pride would not allow them to withdraw. Again and again they assaulted bastions, only to find that the enemy had already withdrawn, and that the ground for which they had died had become the next battlefield. Though they endured their losses with stoic resolve, the frustration of being unable to bring the enemy to heel gnawed at them relentlessly. They were haunted by memories of the siege of the Imperial Palace, where they had breached the walls at terrible cost, only to find that their most hated foe had vanished. As the Iron Cage closed, the same grim tale repeated itself on every world. Through constant attrition, the Iron Warriors were driven to the brink of extinction. When barely a quarter of their strength remained battle-ready, the traitor Astartes finally launched their counteroffensive. Facing imminent destruction, Yet grimly grateful for the chance at last to confront their enemy face to face, their annihilation was averted only by the intervention of Abaddon, leading a coalition of loyal Astartes who shattered the iron cage. Resigned to his fate, Kruger was startled to feel the traitor's weight lifted from his chest. Blinking blood from his eyes, he dimly saw the brutalized corpse of an Imperial fist being hoisted and casually hurled aside. Despite the repainted black Terminator armor, Kruger could not fail to recognize his savior. With a gesture of thanks, he grasped the hand Abaddon offered and hauled himself unsteadily to his feet. Stunned and wordless, he surveyed the battlefield and saw Astartes of the Death Guard, the Thousand Sons, the Night Lords, the Word-Bearers, and Abaddon's famed Black Templars crashing into the now engaged Imperial fists with unrestrained fury. "Apologies for intruding upon your war zone, Warsmith Kruger," came the deep growl. "But the skills of the Iron Warriors are needed on Terra. We have an Imperium to rebuild."
With the galaxy left in ruins by the Heresy, the Iron Warriors were tasked first with refortifying Terra, and then the rest of the Imperium. They expanded and rebuilt the defenses surrounding the Astronomicon, transforming it into an armored city far more imposing than the old Imperial Palace. Having witnessed the effectiveness of garrison worlds in imposing order, the Legion returned to that model. Worlds of strategic importance were selected, those guarding major transit routes across the Imperium, centers of industrial production, and, most critically, the fortress worlds watching over the Eye of Terror. Deprived of Mechanicum support, they extracted tithes from their garrison worlds in the form of raw materials, war production, and, crucially, to cement their relationship with the planets they defended, recruits. Determined not to repeat the mistake of the Great Crusade, when they had become overstretched and isolated, the Legion expanded far beyond its pre-heresy strength. This expansion was further reinforced by the incorporation of vast numbers of weapons servitors, war machines, and other increasingly specialized instruments of destruction, allowing them to adopt a proactive defensive posture and destroy the enemy before it could launch an attack. Another factor driving this growth was that while they acknowledged Abaddon's intervention in breaking the iron cage, the idea of remaining so deeply indebted, even to a close ally, now ran counter to their very nature. Their mistrust was not limited to their brother Astartes. Such was their contempt for the artillery accuracy of the Imperial Army and Navy, and for the losses suffered due to what they saw as gross incompetence, that the creation of their own heavy artillery arm became an absolute priority. The rupture with the Adepts of Mars did not heal after the Heresy. In fact, it worsened as the Mechanicum sank ever deeper into superstition. To compensate for this lack of trust, the Iron Warriors constructed war machines patterned after the massive Ordinati, towering Knight-class walkers, and even, so rumors claim, Titans. The Adepts of Mars protested, arguing that such assets should rightfully be reclaimed by them, but the Iron Warriors steadfastly maintained that these engines are the product of their own ingenuity alone. While the Legion does recover damaged Mechanicum assets from the battlefield, such items are always scrupulously returned to their world forge of origin. Of all the traitor Astartes who assailed the Imperium, the former Imperial Fists drew the greatest attention from the Legion. Whether calling themselves the Black Legion, Sons of Dorn, or Crimson Fists, the Iron Warriors seized every opportunity to engage them. The elusive nature of the Blood Angels meant that chances to bring them to decisive battle were rare. The sole exception occurred on Macon in the late 37th millennium, when the traitors lured the Legion into a trap that resulted in the massacre of much of 2 grand companies, and granted the Iron Warriors a measure of vengeance for the death of their Primarch. This focus on the legions of chaos, particularly around the Eye of Terror, came at the expense of the frontier bordering Guilliman's Ultramar segmentum. Despite the Legion's size and strength, even they could not garrison it effectively across its full breadth. The worlds under their control withstood that relentless advance far better than those around them, resulting in isolated enclaves of the Imperium scattered deep within Ultramar space.
Under the dominion of the Iron Warriors, adamantium and ceramite were fused with quarried stone to transform Olympia into a fortress world of unprecedented scale. The ancient city-states had become towering armored hive cities devoted entirely to supporting the Legion. Crowned with void shields and defensive laser batteries, their spires rise above the cloud layer. Competition between hive cities to supply the Astartes with weapons, vehicles, and recruits is fierce, and not always bloodless. Since the uprising at the dawn of the Heresy, the population has been subject to strict controls. Any element deemed capable of disrupting the planet's function is crushed without mercy, whether subversives, agents of the ruinous powers, or excessive rivalry between competing hives. Olympia stands at the heart of a vast production network spanning the Imperium, its industrial capacity rivaling that of some of the greatest forge worlds. Tithes of raw materials flow in from garrison worlds, and in return, finely crafted engines of war are sent back to equip the Iron Warriors in their campaigns. To sustain this exchange, Olympia is encircled by orbital shipyards, solar collectors, space docks, and defensive platforms. Yet its fortified nature extends far beyond the planet itself, with war fleets, minefields, and early warning systems standing ready to intercept any unauthorized visitor.
Designed by Perturabo after his first visit to Mars, though not completed until nearly 2,000 years after his death, the Alexiares spaceport is one of the greatest technological marvels of the Imperium. Positioned in geosynchronous orbit above Mount Antecedus, the tallest peak on Olympia, it serves as the primary conduit for material traffic entering and leaving the planet. Vast adamantium cables descend through the atmosphere to a base station atop the mountain, forming elevators capable of transporting bulk cargo between orbit and surface with unmatched efficiency. Once sealed and pressurized, the spaceport became the tallest structure in the Imperium, boasting capacity and throughput far exceeding that of orbital shuttle transport. Owing to its iconic status, its vital industrial role, and the hard lessons learned from the destruction of the orbital elevators at Uranius Patera during the Heresy, the utmost precautions have been taken to safeguard this structure against any form of attack. Following the massacre on the worlds of the Iron Cage and the humiliation of being rescued by Abaddon's crusades, the Iron Warriors swore never again to be placed in such a position. To that end, they undertook an aggressive recruitment drive, ensuring that their grand companies fielded far more frontline Astartes than they had prior to the Heresy. Today, most warsmiths command at least 5,000 battle brothers, supported by a throng of servants that may outnumber them 20 to 1. The core of each grand company is its armory, and the quality and volume of its output are a source of immense pride. Rather than operating as an independent institution, the apothecarian is subordinate to the master of the forge, and is responsible not only for the medical care of the Astartes, but also for the creation and maintenance of the Legion's vast army of servitors. The Iron Warriors' innate mistrust frequently gives rise to internal rivalries, and competition among lieutenants is deliberately encouraged by the warsmiths to drive higher performance. Such rivalries are restrained only when they threaten to become destructive to the Legion as a whole. Each lieutenant commands hundreds of space marines, squadrons of armored vehicles, and enough artillery to reduce entire cities to rubble. Periodically, these veterans, hardened by countless campaigns, are withdrawn from the front lines to fulfill garrison duties, where they can re-equip, repair, and resupply their forces. The defense of these worlds is critical, as the tithes they provide are essential to the Legion's continued expansion. The loss of a garrison world is a source of profound shame, and a warsmith will go to any lengths to rectify it. The death of a warsmith, particularly if no clear successor has been named, is a moment of extreme tension. Ambition and long-simmering rivalries rise swiftly to the surface.
On rare occasions, the struggle for power grows so intense that the only recourse is to petition the Council of Warsmiths for permission to divide the forces and form a new Grand Company. As a result, the number of Grand Companies has grown far beyond the original 12, though such decisions are never made lightly. Most aspirants to command calculate that it is preferable to wait for the tides of war and mortality to elevate them naturally, rather than hastily assume control of a weakened Grand Company exposed to destruction.
Master of the Legion. Following the death of Perturabo, Warsmith Foryx, the Breaker of the First Grand Company, assumed the title of Master of the Legion. Tragically, his tactical acumen proved insufficient, and he led the Legion headlong into the meat grinder of the Iron Cage worlds. He perished, alongside hundreds of his brothers, in the frozen hell of Alta Parsania, and due to his failures, his name was struck from the annals of history. Since that time, supreme authority has resided with the Council of Warsmiths, although the commander of the First Grand Company still bears the honorary title of Master of the Legion and speaks for the Iron Warriors before the High Lords of Terra. The role is now largely ceremonial. The Trident is composed of 3 Warsmiths, known as the Triarchs, who once served Perturabo as his personal advisors. After the Primarch's death during the siege of the Imperial Palace, they continued to fulfill their sacred duty by serving the Master of the Legion. The Trident exists outside the regular command structure of the Fourth Legion. Collectively, it functions as the soul of the Iron Warriors, supporting their lord and guiding the Legion's temperament and decisions. Only Warsmiths possessing exceptional strength and charisma may serve alongside the Lord of Iron. In honor of the Lord of Iron, the members of the Trident are held to the highest standards. Absolute discipline, loyalty, and unbreakable obedience to received orders are expected of them. Each blade of the Trident is as solid and unyielding as the hand that wields it. Triarch, an honorary rank reserved for each of the 3 Warsmiths who comprise the advisory Trident of the Fourth Legion. Warsmith, an honorary title borne by the most senior Astartes captains who command the Legion's great battalions. It is granted for exceptional skill and valor in siege warfare, and confers authority over several companies combined into the larger formation known as a Grand Battalion. Honorable, an honorary rank held by the distinguished Iron Warrior charged with presiding over the assemblies of the Dodecatheon.
Tyrant Siege Terminator Squad. The vanguard of any Iron Warrior's siege-breaking force, these Astartes are clad in heavy cataphracti-patterned Terminator armor and bear lethal Cyclone missile launchers mounted upon their carapaces. Recruited from among the most battle-hardened warriors, they are expected to endure the fiercest enemy fire without regard for their own survival. They commonly serve as part of the Stor Bezashk, the Legion's elite siege masters, and are deployed wherever they are needed to support assault and breach operations. Iron Havoc Support Squad, an elite unit specializing in saturating enemy positions and annihilating armored targets through overwhelming heavy firepower. Its members rank among the finest marksmen in the Legion, placing shells and charges with millimetric precision while advancing in lockstep with the assault forces. The Iron Circle. Formed after the attack on Perturabu's flagship, Iron Blood, during the Battle of Fall, the Iron Circle is a self-sufficient unit of relentless killers, devoted servitors, and incorruptible Praetorians. It is composed of 6 Colossus-class battle automata that served as shield breakers and the Primarch's personal honor guard during the Dornian Heresy. Each automaton bore the heraldry of a warrior of the Fourth Legion, and their mechanical hearts were loyal in the way only a machine can be. Following the Primarch's death, the Iron Circle now serves the Master of the Legion. Stor Bezashk, the Siege Masters, specialists in heavy artillery and demolition munitions.
Experts in high-yield explosive charges, they are responsible for fabricating the devices required for the Legion's massive siege works once the optimal point of breach in the enemy's defenses has been identified.
Within the Legion exist long-standing warrior societies that operate on the fringes of the formal military hierarchy and are rarely known beyond the 4th Legion. It is said that they are so deeply entrenched that they resist any outside influence. Among them are the Dodecatheon, or Brotherhood of Stone, the oldest, largest, and most influential of the warrior societies. Originally a tactical symposium in the tradition of Terra's Warcast Metastrad culture, it focuses on the art of siegecraft and military architecture. After Perturabo's reunification with the Legion, the Primarch vastly expanded the organization and renamed it the Dodecatheon in honor of the cultural traditions of Olympia. Within the Legion, it functions as a forum of competition and learning. War games, tournaments, siege simulations, the presentation of designs, and the analysis of battle reports. Though theoretically open to all Iron Warriors, in practice it is attended only by those who have distinguished themselves in combat. The Apollocron, or Brotherhood of Steel, a smaller organization operating as a division of the Dodecatheon, its focus lies in the construction of machines, combat automata, their maintenance, and their employment in warfare. It maintains a precarious alliance with the Mechanicum, limited to those tech priests who have long served the Legion, and is viewed with suspicion by the Legio Cybernetica, which considers it a rival for its monopoly on arcane knowledge. The Kelidakos, or Brotherhood of Cold. Emerging after the Legion's earliest campaigns under Perturabo, its ranks include Astartes, senior officers, Mechanicum Magi, engineers, and void shipwrights who maintain and crew the Legion's warships. Their base is the Black Citadel, the most heavily fortified orbital shipyard of Olympia. Their obsession is void warfare and the design of warships and assault craft. The Lysatra, or Brotherhood of Thunder, the most obscure and sectarian of the societies, derisively referred to as the Burned Men. They gather brutalized and unhinged armorers, smiths, and artillerymen whose obsession with destruction exceeds even the Legion's already extreme standards. Rumors persist that they maintain secret dealings with esoteric ideologies and forbidden xenotech. The Tyrannicos, or the Dominators, a veteran corps of line breakers and assault specialists who have survived 20 desperate sieges. They are the foremost advocates of Terminator armor within the Legion and are distributed throughout the Grand Battalions.
Masters of siege warfare and attritional assault tactics, the Iron Warriors favor the use of lethal firepower as their primary instrument of war. They are renowned for their employment of heavy armor and fortifications, scorning the vainglorious ideals of personal combat and individual honor in favor of the brutal determination to achieve victory by any means necessary. This philosophy culminated in tactical formations such as the infamous Hammer of Olympia, designed to deliver relentless close-range attacks and crush even the strongest defensive lines beneath the weight of armored warriors and a hurricane of fire. To those unfamiliar with the Legion, the Iron Warriors appear to rely solely on overwhelming firepower to obliterate their enemies before finishing off the survivors. In truth, their approach is far more analytical, subtle, and above all, effective. They retain the keen intellect of Perturabo and view the defeat of the enemy as a puzzle to be solved. In defense, they make extensive use of fixed positions, bunkers, and heavy gun emplacements, allowing even a relatively small number of Iron Warriors to effectively hold vast areas against attack. Every element is optimized to provide clear lines of sight and interlocking fields of fire. Terrain,
Obstacles and minefields subtly funnel the enemy into optimal kill zones, while the extensive use of high-output weapons servitors frees the Astartes themselves, allowing them to act as a mobile reserve capable of responding to unexpected counterattacks. They are also able to rapidly assess evolving situations and react accordingly. A famous example occurred when the infantry of the Third Grand Company transformed the shattered outskirts of the hive city Fortunus into a fortified battlefield mere hours after arrival. This halted an orc assault long enough for the Iron Warriors to deploy their full arsenal from orbit and annihilate the horde once and for all. On the attack, they adopt the same methodical approach: exhaustive scans, sustained bombardments, and infiltration feints designed to probe enemy strengths and weaknesses. Each Grand Company employs its own methods, shaped by the philosophy of its warsmith and the resources of its armory. Most adhere to the traditional doctrine of a massive armored blitzkrieg with vindicators and fellblades supported by mechanized infantry and land raiders. However, the 8th and 30th Grand Companies prefer to bypass enemy defenses entirely, employing extensive teleportation networks or tunneling vehicles respectively to strike directly at the heart of the fortress. Other companies utilize even more exotic assets, such as the massive Ordinati of the 6th, 9th, and 16th Grand Companies, or the towering Imperial Knights of the 20th, which eclipse even super-heavy war machines. Before the Heresy, the Iron Warriors worked closely with the forces of Mars. The Scriptura Maxis of Olympia records numerous instances of Perturabo fighting aboard the Corvus assault pod of a warlord Titan. Rumors persist that the First Grand Company still retains access to such devices. However, if they have ever been deployed, no enemy has lived to bear witness.
The Legion is methodical and coldly logical in its outlook, convinced that any problem or obstacle will yield given sufficient time. The greatest tragedies in its history, such as the Battle at the Gate and the Iron Cage campaign, occurred when passion was allowed to override reason. This bitter experience has rendered the Iron Warriors deeply distrustful of others, and in response, they have sought to armor themselves against any possibility of future betrayal. They remain firmly loyal to the Emperor, whom they respect from a purely rational perspective, and thus have little patience for dealings with the word-bearers. Likewise, esoteric practices, such as the use of psychic powers, are regarded with deep suspicion. Although they grudgingly accept the vital role played by astropaths and navigators in the day-to-day administration of the Imperium, the study of such disciplines is considered an inappropriate calling for an Iron Warrior. In the absence of librarians capable of combating daemons and chaos sorcerers, the Legion has applied its technological expertise to the task. For the Grand Companies guarding the Eye of Terror, null fields and specialized weaponry from the forges of Olympia are considered more valuable than even an inexhaustible supply of ammunition. These devices are viewed as yet another fortress, a barrier against the horrors and whispering madness of the warp.
In addition to Perturabo's cold, analytical logic, traits such as suspicion and even paranoia have been passed on to his Astartes. In its early days, the Iron Warrior's gene seed was a model of efficiency, but over the millennia, a slow yet steady degradation has occurred in some of its implants. While the oculobe, Laramann's organ, and omophagia function correctly in new initiates, their effectiveness diminishes over time. Wherever possible, these deficiencies have been compensated for through cybernetics, and it is not uncommon for Legion veterans to bear bionic eyes and rely heavily on their armor's autosenses. One implant that has shown no signs of degradation is the catalepsian node, which allows the brain to remain alert for extended periods and reduces the need for sleep. Given their extensive duties as garrison troops, this trait is vital to their survival, for an Iron Warrior unable to remain vigilant would not live long enough to pass on his gene seed to the next generation. Chief Apothecary Ansel relinquished his position as Master of the Forges, barely concealing his rage. First, he was reprimanded for failing to meet the recruitment quotas demanded by his warsmith.
Then he was censured for the growing instability of the gene seed. Ansel knew all too well the cause of this degradation. Over the millennia, the apothecarian had been forced time and again to relax genetic purity controls to meet recruitment demands. His protests were ignored, and his request to impose stricter oversight was rejected. Even his warnings regarding the effects of prolonged proximity to the Eye of Terror were dismissed as irrelevant. For the past 10,000 years, they had been complicit in the contamination of Perturabo's genetic legacy. Ansel had longed to shake his lord and tear away that self-satisfaction, but he knew that raising a hand against him would only bring death. He remembered the countless times he had saved that arrogant fool's life on the battlefield, and realized that perhaps there was another way to address the problem.
The Iron Warriors Legion has proven itself to be the unbreakable bastion the Imperium needed to endure these 10,000 years. Even after the death of their Primarch, they have remained steadfast against the countless enemies of the Imperium. Yet their very nature may become their greatest weakness. Constant distrust, paranoia, the rupture with the Mechanicus of Mars, and the gradual degradation of their gene seed threaten to open a breach in their defenses. And when that happens, it may already be too late. The Iron Warriors are one of my favorite Chaos Legions, or, in this case, unwaveringly loyal servants of the Emperor. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments which other legions you'd like to see in the next episode, though the Blood Angels are up next. Thank you very much for making it this far and for all your support. Until next time.